I walked into my sister's engagement party already feeling like I didn't belong. String lights glowed overhead. Champagne glasses clinked. Expensive cologne mixed with the scent of roses. Then I heard him. Adrian Voss, my sister's fiancé, turned to his friends and announced loudly that at least the free food would help the unemployed brother-in-law. Laughter erupted. My sister Marina giggled behind her hand. My mother smiled like it was just harmless fun. My chest tightened, but I didn't react. None of them knew they were celebrating in a venue I'd approved, or that this night wasn't ending in toasts. Before I tell you what happened next, share if your family ever underestimated you, because what came after that joke changed everything forever. My name is Darren Tate. I'm 29, and for most of my life, I've learned how to take up very little space. I speak carefully. I observe more than I participate. I wear plain clothes that don't announce anything about me, not because I lack confidence, but because I learned early that being overlooked can be safer than being scrutinized. I grew up in a home where attention had already been assigned. My older sister, Marina, was the shining one. Charismatic, social, effortlessly charming. Teachers remembered her. Neighbors praised her. My mother, Beatrice, built her identity around Marina's success without ever meaning to diminish me. It just happened. At family dinners, Marina's stories filled the room. Mine were met with distracted nods, like background music nobody was really listening to. The only person who truly understood me was my uncle. He worked in construction, quiet and steady, building things that lasted. He told me once that real strength doesn't announce itself. It just holds when everything else falls apart. He left me his toolbox when he died, along with a note that said I was the only one who would understand what to do with it. I left for college at 18 with a partial scholarship and 2 jobs. Long nights, cheap meals, silent ambition. I studied engineering, then business, then both. Over time, I built something small, then something bigger. I saved. I invested. I started Tate Developments quietly, without fanfare or family involvement. 4 years, I worked on projects nobody at home knew about. I didn't tell them. They never asked. When bills arrived that my family couldn't cover, I sent money anonymously. Medical expenses, mortgage payments, car repairs. I didn't want credit. I just wanted them to be okay. So when Marina's engagement invitation arrived, weeks after everyone else had been told, I still went. Part of me hoped that maybe this time, walking into that room would feel different. Standing in the garden, though, watching my mother glow beside Marina and Adrian, I realized nothing had changed. I was still the afterthought. I'd just been too stubborn to admit it. I tried to stay invisible, blending into the edges of the party. That's a skill you develop when you grow up knowing you're tolerated, not celebrated. I stood near a tall table, fingers wrapped around a glass I wasn't drinking from, watching the celebration move around me like I was furniture. My mother drifted from group to group, repeating the same glowing stories about Marina and Adrian. Every sentence started with their names. When she finally noticed me, her smile tightened. Her eyes dropped to my jeans and button-down shirt, then back to my face. She leaned in and asked quietly, but pointedly, if I'd considered wearing something more formal. She said Adrian's family came from old money, stressing the words like they were instructions. I told her I'd come straight from a site meeting. She sighed, the same tired exhale she'd used my whole life, and turned away before I could finish explaining. That's when Adrian raised his glass. The music quieted. People turned toward him, smiling, expectant. He thanked everyone for coming, his voice smooth and confident. Then his eyes found me near the back, and his grin widened. "And let's not forget my future brother-in-law," he said, louder now. "Thanks for showing up, Darren. I know free food means a lot when you're between gigs." The garden erupted in laughter. Some people looked uncomfortable. Most didn't. Marina covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. My mother shook her head like I was a joke she'd heard before. Heat crawled up my neck, but I didn't move. I lifted my glass slightly, playing along, while a single thought crystallized in my mind. He has no idea who he's mocking. I stepped out through the garden gate, letting the noise fade behind me. The cool evening air hit my face, grounding me. I leaned against the stone wall and pulled out my phone, scrolling through emails I'd been ignoring during the party. 3 new contracts signed that week. A downtown development breaking ground in 2 months. Investors requesting meetings. My calendar was packed for the next 6 months. But my family didn't know any of this. They thought I was a site supervisor, someone who carried blueprints and checked schedules. I'd never corrected them. Being underestimated kept me out of their drama, kept me focused on building something real instead of performing success at family gatherings. I opened my files and scrolled through active projects. Then I froze. Voss Construction. Signed 4 months ago for a commercial build downtown. Adrian's company. My signature at the bottom of the contract. His company worked for mine, and he just insulted me in front of everyone while his business depended on my approval to keep running. I stared at the screen, letting that settle in. He didn't know. He had no idea who was funding his biggest project. Growing up, family dinners always followed the same script. Marina sat at my mother's right hand, glowing under constant attention. Every achievement, no matter how small, became a celebration. Every idea she mentioned was brilliant. Every friend she made was important. I sat across from them, quieter, steadier, less interesting. When I brought home good grades, my mother would nod absently and ask Marina about her weekend plans. When I won an engineering competition, she'd pat my shoulder and remind me that Marina had just been elected class president. "You're the reliable one," she told me once while folding laundry. "Marina's the exceptional one. Every family needs both." I learned early that fighting for attention only made me look desperate. So I stopped fighting. I focused on my work, my plans, my future. I built my life in the spaces they didn't occupy, and eventually, those spaces grew larger than their spotlight. But the conditioning stayed. That calm exterior, that quiet acceptance, it had been trained into me since childhood. Now, standing outside Marina's engagement party, I understood something clearly. I didn't need their validation anymore. I never had. The only person who needed to believe in me was me. I walked back inside just as Adrian was giving another speech. He stood near the fountain, confident and loud, gesturing with his champagne flute. "Success," he said, pausing dramatically, "belongs to those who take risks, not those who play it safe." His eyes flicked toward me briefly, a smirk tugging at his mouth. Marina stood beside him, radiant in her white dress. The guests applauded. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, emotional and proud. I stayed near the back, expression neutral. Then I noticed a man in an expensive suit talking to one of Adrian's business partners. His voice carried just enough for me to overhear. "Voss Construction locked in that exclusive partnership with Tate Developments," the man said, grinning. "Downtown project. Adrian's really moving up in the world." Adrian was 10 feet away, accepting compliments, completely unaware. He didn't even know who Tate was. He didn't recognize the name on the contract funding his company's expansion. I pulled out my phone and opened a note app. "Let's see how ambitious you really are, Adrian." Later that night, I excused myself and headed toward the restrooms. The venue was quieter inside, music muffled by walls and distance. I passed family photos displayed on easels, Marina smiling in every single frame while I appeared in the background, blurred and easy to miss. Then I heard Adrian's voice, sharp and frustrated, coming from around the corner. I stopped, staying just out of sight. He was on the phone, pacing near the service entrance. "I told you to use the cheaper steel," he hissed. "Nobody's going to inspect the foundation that closely. We make the swap, pocket the difference, everybody wins." Silence while the other person responded. "Look," Adrian continued, voice dropping lower, "fake the invoices if you have to. Just make sure the numbers match what's in the Tate contract. Their people won't notice. They're too busy to audit every detail." My hand moved instinctively to my pocket. I pulled out my phone, opened the recording app, and hit record. Adrian kept talking, outlining the fraud with casual confidence, like cutting corners was just smart business. When he finally hung up, I slipped back down the hallway before he could see me. My heart pounded, but my hands stayed steady. I opened my files and found the exact project he'd mentioned. Same location. Same timeline. Same budget. My project. My contract. My money he was planning to steal. Back home that night, I sat at my desk and pulled up the Voss construction agreement. My lawyer had drafted it carefully, and I'd added one section myself after a previous contractor tried something similar. Clause 14. Any evidence of fraud, misrepresentation, or unethical conduct voids all payments immediately and transfers project ownership rights to Tate Developments. It sat there in black and white, waiting. I played the recording again, Adrian's voice clear and damning. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a gray area. This was deliberate fraud. For the first time, I hesitated. Activating Clause 14 would destroy Adrian's company. It would collapse his reputation, empty his accounts, and humiliate Marina in the process. She had nothing to do with his schemes, but she'd suffer the consequences anyway. Could I do that to her? My phone buzzed. A text from Marina. Mom says you know people in development. Can you help Adrian get more contracts? He's trying to expand and needs connections. I stared at the message for a long moment. They still thought I was small, unimportant, someone who knew people instead of being the person people needed to know. I typed back slowly. Sure. Let's set up a meeting. We met at a cafe downtown 3 days later. Adrian arrived 20 minutes late, sunglasses on, tie loose like he'd just closed a major deal. He shook my hand with too much pressure, sat down without apologizing, and immediately launched into his pitch. Marina says you've got connections at Tate Developments, he said, leaning forward with false interest. I need an introduction to someone higher up. Someone with real decision-making power. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch. What kind of expansion are you looking for? Bigger projects, he said, confidence swelling. We're handling that downtown build right now, but I want to triple our contracts next year. Problem is, Tate's lower-level people are dragging their feet. I need to talk to someone who actually matters. I nodded, pretending to take notes on my phone. Tell me about the current project. How's that going? Adrian's arrogance took over. He talked for 30 minutes straight, explaining how his team worked faster than anyone else, how they found creative ways to reduce costs, how clients loved their efficiency. He danced around the fraud without saying it directly, but I heard every word he didn't say. I let him talk himself into a corner, building his own case against himself with every sentence. My phone buzzed during his monologue. A text from my lawyer. That recording you sent. It's criminal fraud. More than enough for prosecution. The family photo shoot happened the following weekend. Marina had hired a professional photographer to capture engagement memories at a scenic overlook outside the city. My mother insisted I come. Family is everything, Darren, she'd said on the phone, her tone leaving no room for argument. I showed up in jeans and a casual jacket. My mother took one look and sighed audibly. Darren, couldn't you have dressed better? These photos are going in Marina's album. Adrian appeared beside her, arm draped around Marina's shoulders. He glanced at me and smirked. Try not to ruin the photos, yeah? He said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. Marina laughed softly, adjusting her hair. I smiled for the camera, standing exactly where the photographer directed, blending into the background like I always did. But while everyone posed and smiled and performed happiness, I pulled out my phone during a water break. I opened my email and composed a message to my compliance officer. Subject line, Clause 14 activation. I attached the recording, the project files, and the signed contract. Then I pressed send. The camera shutter clicked. The photographer called for another pose. And somewhere across the city, consequences began to unfold. The call came at 7:30 the next morning. I was drinking coffee when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A panicked voice spoke fast, words tumbling over each other. Mr. Tate, this is Carson from Voss Construction. We just received a contract termination notice. It says immediate suspension and payment freeze. There has to be some kind of mistake. I set my coffee down carefully. No mistake. The notice is accurate. But we're in the middle of the downtown project. We have crews on site. We have materials ordered. Suppliers waiting for payment. You can't just check clause 14, I said calmly. Everything's explained there. Silence. Then quieter, more frightened. What's clause 14? Ethics breach clause. When evidence of fraud is confirmed, all agreements become void. I heard papers rustling frantically. Voices shouting in the background. This is insane. Mr. Voss is going to call you directly. He's welcome to try, I said and ended the call. Within 2 hours, my office phone was ringing constantly. My cell phone. My email inbox. Investors demanding explanations. Lawyers requesting documentation. Suppliers asking about payments. The termination spread through the construction industry like wildfire. Voss Construction had just become untouchable. And Adrian still didn't understand why. Marina stormed into my office just before noon. She didn't knock. She pushed through the glass doors, face flushed, eyes wide with confusion and fury. Then she stopped. She saw the logo on the wall behind my desk. Tate Developments. Large, professional, unmistakable. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around the office slowly, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the leather furniture, the contracts stacked neatly on my desk. "Darren," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Sit down, Marina." She didn't sit. She stared at everything like she'd walked into the wrong building. "You own this? You're Tate." "Yes." Her voice rose sharply. "And you just destroyed Adrian's company. You could have warned us. You could have told me he was working for you. You could have," I interrupted, keeping my tone level. "Warned you about what, exactly? That your fiancé is committing fraud? That he's stealing from me?" She slammed her hand on my desk, making the papers jump. "He wouldn't do that." I turned my laptop around and played the recording. Adrian's voice filled the office, clear and damning, talking about cheap materials, fake invoices, pocketing the difference. Marina's face went pale. She listened to the entire thing without moving, without blinking. When it finished, she looked at me, tears forming in her eyes. "Why didn't you just talk to him first? Give him a chance to explain." "Because fraud isn't a conversation, Marina," I said quietly. "It's a crime." She turned and walked out without another word, the door closing softly behind her. That evening, my mother called. Her voice was cold, clipped, controlled. "Adrian says you set him up. He says you fabricated evidence because you're jealous of Marina's happiness. You're coming to dinner tonight to explain yourself." I almost refused. But something made me agree. They needed to hear the truth, even if they wouldn't believe it. Dinner was unbearable from the start. Adrian sat at the head of the table, playing the victim with practiced ease. His voice shook as he explained how I'd targeted him, how I'd manipulated documents, how I was trying to destroy his future with Marina out of spite and bitterness. My mother listened, nodding sympathetically, her loyalty already decided. Marina sat silent, staring at her untouched plate. When Adrian finished his performance, my mother turned to me, her expression hard. "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet, setting it gently on the table. "I have something you need to see." I pressed play. Adrian's voice filled the dining room, bragging about swapping cheap steel, faking invoices, cutting corners to maximize profit. The table went completely silent. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Marina's eyes locked on Adrian, who'd gone pale. "That's out of context," Adrian said quickly, standing up. "He edited it. He manipulated." I played another clip. Then another. Each one worse than the last, each one undeniable. Adrian lunged across the table, reaching desperately for the tablet. Marina screamed. I pulled it back calmly, standing without rushing. Don't, I said quietly. Adrian froze mid-reach, breathing hard, fear replacing arrogance. My mother looked between us, her perfect family image crumbling in real time, her face unreadable. The news broke online early the next morning. Voss Construction under investigation for fraud and contract violations. The article detailed everything. The fake invoices, the material swaps, the systematic theft. Within hours, Adrian's investors pulled out completely. His bank froze his accounts pending investigation. His clients canceled contracts. Suppliers filed liens. Marina's phone exploded with calls from friends, relatives, reporters wanting statements. She stopped answering after the first 20. My mother locked herself in her bedroom, refusing to speak to anyone, unable to process that the world she'd carefully constructed was collapsing. I stayed in my office, watching the fallout from a necessary distance. My legal team confirmed Tate Developments faced no liability. The contracts were airtight. Then my phone rang. A journalist from the city's largest business publication. Mr. Tate, we're running a feature on the Voss scandal. We'd like your official comment as the contract owner who exposed the fraud. I paused, considering carefully. Then I gave a brief statement about integrity in construction, about the responsibility developers have to protect public safety, about why ethics clauses exist in the first place. The article published that afternoon. My name appeared as the principal developer who discovered the scheme and reported it immediately. The business community praised my transparency. Social media called me a hero for accountability. And Marina, sitting alone in her apartment, saw the headline on her phone. Her brother, the one she'd overlooked her entire life, was being celebrated while her fiancé faced criminal charges. Adrian showed up at my office 2 days later. Security called first, asking permission. I told them to let him up. He walked in looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. No confident grin. No expensive sunglasses. Just a man whose entire world had imploded. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I gestured toward the chair. He sat down heavily, hands trembling slightly in his lap. I'll repay everything, he said desperately. Every dollar I cut, every shortcut I took. I'll make it right. Just please, rescind the report. Tell the investigators it was a misunderstanding. I can't lose everything. I leaned back in my chair, studying him carefully. This was the man who'd mocked me publicly. Who'd treated me like I was beneath him. Who'd stolen from me while laughing about it. You gambled, I said finally, my voice calm and even. You bet that nobody would notice. That nobody would care enough to check. That you could cheat your way to success. I made a mistake, he whispered, tears forming. I'm sorry. You're not sorry you did it, I said. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. He knew I was right. Then maybe you shouldn't have gambled with what wasn't yours, I said quietly. He stood slowly, shoulders sagging under the weight of consequences, and walked out without another word. An hour later, my email pinged. A wedding cancellation notice sent to all the vendors and guests. I'd been CC'd by mistake. The engagement was officially over. Marina came to my apartment that night. She didn't call first. She just knocked, and when I opened the door, she looked destroyed. Eyes red and swollen. Makeup gone. Hair tied back messily. Can I come in? She asked, voice small and broken. I stepped aside silently. She sat on my couch and cried for a long time before speaking. Neither of us rushed the silence. I lost him, she finally said. I lost clients who trusted his company. I lost friends who think I knew about the fraud. Everyone's talking about me. Did you know? I asked gently. No, she said quickly. Then, quieter, more honest. But I should have asked questions. I should have paid attention when things didn't add up. We sat in silence for several minutes. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. I never saw you, she said, her voice cracking. Not really. You were always just there. Steady. Quiet. Reliable. I never thought about what you were actually doing with your life. I know, I said simply. Why didn't you tell us? About the company. About everything. Because you never asked, I said. And because staying invisible kept me focused on what mattered. She nodded slowly, understanding settling in. I'm sorry. For everything. For how we treated you. For how I treated you. For making you feel like you didn't matter. I didn't respond immediately. Apologies were easy to say. Change was much harder to prove. You can start over now, I said finally. Without him. Without the lies. Clean slate. She looked at me, something fragile and hopeful flickering in her eyes. Can I really? Yes, I said. If you actually want to. She left a little while later, and for the first time, I believed she might genuinely try to rebuild herself honestly. My mother called exactly 1 week later, asking to meet at a cafe downtown. I almost declined, but curiosity outweighed caution. She sat across from me, perfectly composed as always, though I could see the cracks in her careful facade. I want to fix this, she said, her voice controlled and measured. The family's reputation has been damaged. I think we should start a business together. Something that restores our name in the community. I watched her carefully, seeing everything she wasn't saying. She still didn't understand. She still saw this as an image problem, not a fundamental moral failure. I reached into my bag and pulled out a document, sliding it across the table slowly. She picked it up, confusion crossing her face. It was a repayment plan. Every dollar I'd ever sent anonymously. Every bill I'd covered in secret. Every expense I'd quietly absorbed to keep them afloat. All of it itemized, totaled, dated, with a structured payment schedule attached. What is this? She asked, her voice tightening. Closure, I said simply. She stared at the paper, then at me, something shifting behind her eyes. Is this revenge? No, I said. It's a boundary. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being the backup plan nobody acknowledges. If you want a real relationship with me, it starts with respect. And respect starts with accountability. I signed the bottom of the document with deliberate care, stood up, and walked out. She didn't follow. She didn't call after me. She just sat there holding a piece of paper that said more than I ever could with words. Some lessons don't need explanations. Just ink and silence. The weeks that followed felt different. Quieter. Clearer. The investigations moved forward without me. There were depositions, hearings, consequences unfolding the way they always do when truth is finally allowed to stand without interference. Ethan reached out eventually. Not with excuses or justifications. Just honesty. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the certainty he'd carried his whole life. He told me he kept replaying all the signs he'd ignored, all the moments he'd chosen comfort over truth. I told him healing doesn't start with explanations. It starts with listening. He nodded like that was something entirely new to him. My mother called again after that, and this time her voice didn't carry authority. It carried weight. She said she hadn't known about the money I'd sent. I told her that wasn't the same as not being responsible for how she treated me. I showed her the records again, slowly, letting each payment speak for itself. She cried quietly, not to manipulate, but because something fundamental had finally broken open inside her. We didn't fix everything. Not even close. But the pretending stopped, and that mattered more than apologies ever could. Some endings aren't clean or triumphant. They're just honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the only real foundation for peace. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or made to feel small by your own family, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments, and if this resonated with you, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.